This is Abomination, Devil Worship and Deception in the West Memphis 3 Murders by William Ramsey. And William Ramsey has a lot of good resources online. I think he has a really good podcast. Unfortunately, I'm not caught up on all of his latest material. Lots of good stuff on that. But this is probably one of the most comprehensive books. There's really not a whole lot about the West Memphis 3 other than some of their self-promoting some of the documentaries that have been put out there to kind of dispel things like this. But this came out right pretty soon after the three of them were released from prison. Not acquitted, but released from prison. And this was published in copyright from 2012. So I believe they were, memory serves me right, they were released in 2011 on an Alford plea. And it's a really just so quick synopsis of the case for the uninitiated. The West Memphis 3 were notorious for, in the spring of 1993, and I remember this pretty well. When this happened, it was right before my 20th birthday, and it was a horrific crime. These three little boys were sadly tortured and killed in a creek, and these guys were arrested. I think within a few weeks of the murders, these three guys were arrested, and the initial case was pretty much open shut. One of the guys, Jesse Miskelly, confessed to the crime and details of the crime a multitude of times. I want to say at least three times on official record, and one of which is detailed. The transcript of that confession is in here, and that was after they had achieved a conviction, and he was on his way to prison. He confessed to the crime. So when this unfolded, and I was definitely one of those kids on the fringe, and I had plenty of friends into heavy metal and stuff like that. And I find it laughable in the extreme that this is now chalked up as like a satanic panic case, that these were, backwards communities that just didn't understand the heavy metal culture. So this is a really curious case to me in that you had these three guys get caught, put on trial, fair trial. Again, this is, if you read the documentation on this, these guys definitely received a fair trial and were all convicted and put in prison. And then because of pressure exerted by social media and more specifically Hollywood, releasing, I think, at least two documentaries that were focused on saying that this was all a satanic panic kind of thing, where these were just backwards communities that just didn't understand the heavy metal culture and all that. And they went after, pilloried these three poor kids and were put in prison. Well, the Alford plea, this is interesting because the Alford plea is a really bizarre plea that I don't think most of us even knew existed prior to these guys getting released. It basically says these guys are being released with time served. They're not being acquitted. They're not having their records expunged or anything. They're admitting their guilt as part of that Alford plea. They're saying, we are guilty, and we believe the state tried us again right now, we would be found guilty, but the state has decided we've served enough time and they're releasing us. They're not saying we're not guilty. In fact, they're even absolving the state of that necessary burden of proof to say, anyway. So in light of that, unfortunately, there's been so much hype about this case that in most people's mind, they were exonerated, that this is a case of where the courts re-examined the case, found them to be innocent, and released them. And that is not the case at all. So Abomination came out, and right after, about a year after they were released, And it does a fantastic job of really breaking down the case, the problems with the people saying that these guys are innocent. It really gets deep into Damien Eccles, and he was kind of the ringleader of the group, and his deep involvement in the occult. Now, me personally, if I was Damien Eccles and I was accused of a heinous occult-related crime, I would do everything in my power to distance myself from that and say, no, that's not who I am or whatever. Damien Eccles did the opposite. On death row, he really dove deep into the studying Aleister Crowley and OTO rituals and all that, and has all kinds of tattoos to that effect, and has written all kinds of stuff using the magic spelling, the M-A-G-I-C-K, I believe is the spelling he uses for magic. I heard him interviewed on a local NPR station where he was explaining that type of magic, the Aleister Crowley magic versus the other kind of magic. But anyway, William Ramsey does a great job of breaking that down, and he also discusses several other occult criminal cases and contrasts some of the different cases and all. But the most important thing is this book does a fantastic job of really dismantling the public hype, because again, that's probably the most unsettling part of this whole thing, is these guys were not exonerated based on evidence. They were exonerated based on public hype. So if anything, their release from prison is kind of a weird inverse of the satanic panic kind of thinking, that you literally had these guys, convicted criminals, released onto the street based on public hysteria, but public hysteria traveling in a different direction. So I highly recommend this. If you read Dave McGowan's Program to Kill or Mari Terry's Ultimate Evil, this is a must-have companion book to those. And like I said, his treatment of a lot of these cases, explaining some other occult criminal cases. And William Ramsey does a great job explaining how some of those cases have been really downplayed in the popular press. So to me, the million-dollar question in all of this is why is such a focus being put on these guys and getting them released? Because there's several cases. There was a ritual abuse daycare case with Fran Keller, I believe, down in Austin, which is another one of those that was a very straightforward conviction. And I'll have to dig into that case sometime on here. I have got a lot of information on that because, again, that was one that happened when I was about 18 or 19. And I remember it unfolding, a little bit of hearing that in the news. And later on, when I started digging into this stuff, I started collecting some of the periodicals that were coming out at the time. So at some point, I'll get into that case. But that's another. Fran Keller's case got overturned around the same time as this. So it's almost like someone was sending a message about that, about this particular ideology. I don't know. And if any of you have ideas on that, I'd love to hear it, because it is very curious to me that there's been such an effort to overturn occult criminal cases. And even if they're not overturned, there is a very coordinated media effort to discredit these convictions and say that they're the result of mass hysteria and all. So anyway, for no other reason, get this to read the actual confessions and of the confession of Jesse Misskelley. And I find it also very telling that Misskelley is not paraded around as part of the, and Stephen Baldwin, or I'm sorry, Jason Baldwin, wherever his name is, he's not paraded around as part of the entourage. You hear very little of these two guys and mostly just Damien Eccles. And I think a lot of that's because this dude is a major wrench in the works. So if you're into that sort of thing, if you're into researching occult crime, I cannot recommend this enough. Lots of good information, and also William Ramsey's, some of his social media stuff out there. I think his Instagram page is William Ramsey Investigates or something like that. Lots of good information on his stuff. So I'll leave it there. But that's Abomination, Devil Worship and Deception in the West Memphis 3 Murders by William Ramsey from 2012.